Dr. Layla Carter had always been drawn to the past, her fascination with history a constant companion through her years of medical training. This passion often led her to the hospital archives, a dusty labyrinth of forgotten files and aging documents. Today was no different. The early evening light filtered through the narrow basement windows, casting long shadows as she sorted through a stack of old blueprints and medical records. Her fingers brushed against a rolled-up set of architectural plans that seemed out of place among the more recent documents. Intrigued, she carefully unrolled the fragile paper, revealing a detailed layout of the hospital from decades ago. Her eyes scanned the familiar corridors and wards, but her attention was quickly captured by something unexpected. A section of the hospital she had never seen before, labeled Ward C. Ward C, she muttered to herself, tracing the lines with a finger. It was situated in a part of the building that had been sealed off and forgotten. Layla's curiosity was piqued. She had heard rumors among the staff about a hidden ward, but they were always dismissed as ghost stories meant to scare the new hires. Determined to uncover the truth, Layla folded the blueprint and made her way to the basement. The air grew colder and more oppressive as she descended, the hum of the hospital above fading into an eerie silence. The basement was a maze of storage rooms and maintenance tunnels, and it took her some time to navigate to the area shown on the blueprints. At the far end of a narrow, dimly lit corridor, she found it. A wall that didn't quite match the rest. The bricks were newer, hastily patched over an old doorway. Layla's heart pounded in her chest as she ran her hands over the surface, feeling for any weakness. After a few moments, she found it, a small gap where the mortar had crumbled away. Using a nearby crowbar, she pried at the bricks until they began to give way. Dust and debris clouded the air, and Layla coughed as she pulled the last brick free, revealing a dark, yawning entrance. She shone her flashlight into the space beyond, illuminating a narrow hallway lined with decaying wallpaper and peeling paint. "Here we go," she whispered, stepping through the threshold. The air inside was thick with the scent of mold and something else she couldn't quite place, something metallic and sour. Her footsteps echoed softly as she moved deeper into the forgotten ward. The beam of her flashlight danced across rusted gurneys and overturned chairs, relics of a time long past. A sudden chill ran down her spine, and Layla paused, straining to hear. There it was again, a faint whisper, like the rustle of leaves in the wind. She turned, sweeping her light across the corridor, but saw nothing. The whispering grew louder, more distinct, forming words she couldn't quite understand. Heart racing, Layla pressed on, driven by a mix of fear and determination. The hallway opened into a larger room, and she gasped as her flashlight revealed rows of rusty beds, each with restraints dangling from the sides. The walls were adorned with faded posters promoting hygiene and health, ironic reminders of the ward's original purpose. She approached the nearest bed, her breath catching in her throat as she noticed the name etched into the metal frame. Lucy. The name sent a shiver through her, and she could almost imagine the little girl who might have lain there, waiting for help that never came. A sudden noise made her jump, and she spun around, the flashlight beam catching a shadow flitting across the far wall. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, and she felt a cold hand brush against her arm. Layla's scream echoed through the abandoned ward, and she stumbled backward, nearly dropping her flashlight. As the light flickered, she saw them, ghostly figures emerging from the shadows, their eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. They reached out to her, their mouths moving in silent pleas for help. Overwhelmed by terror, Layla fled back down the corridor, her heart pounding in her ears. She burst through the makeshift entrance and into the relative safety of the basement, collapsing against the wall as she struggled to catch her breath. The whispers faded, but the memory of those haunted eyes lingered. Layla knew she couldn't leave it like this. The spirits of Ward C were trapped, abandoned just as they had been in life. She had to uncover the truth and find a way to set them free, no matter the cost. The next morning, Layla could barely focus on her rounds. The haunting encounter in the hidden ward replayed in her mind, a loop of ghostly whispers and sorrowful eyes. She needed answers, but first, she had to find the ward again in daylight and gather more evidence. During her lunch break, she headed back to the basement, this time equipped with a stronger flashlight, a camera, and a notebook. The hospital hummed with the usual daytime activity, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence of the basement. She found the crumbling wall quickly, now marked by the pile of bricks she had removed. Layla took a deep breath and stepped through the opening once more. The hallway was just as she remembered, decayed and eerie, with a coldness that seemed to seep into her bones. She moved carefully, snapping photos of the corridor and the large room with the rusty beds. As she documented the scene, she noticed something she had missed the night before. A door at the far end of the ward, partially obscured by shadows. Her heart quickened as she approached it, her flashlight revealing the worn, splintered wood. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob. What if there was something even more terrifying behind this door? But curiosity and a sense of duty drove her to turn the knob. The door creaked open, revealing a small, cluttered office. Old medical files and personal belongings were scattered across the floor, and a thick layer of dust coated every surface. Layla stepped inside, her flashlight beam illuminating the room. She picked up a faded photograph from the desk, squinting at the image of a stern-looking nurse standing with a group of children. The nurse's eyes seemed to bore into her, and Layla felt a shiver run down her spine. A sudden movement caught her eye, and she turned to see a filing cabinet in the corner, slowly sliding open, as if pulled by an unseen hand. Layla approached cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. The drawer was filled with patient files, each one labeled with a name and date. She pulled out the first file and flipped it open. It belonged to a girl named Lucy, the same name etched into the bed frame she had seen the night before. The file detailed Lucy's symptoms, treatments, and ultimately, her death. Layla felt a pang of sorrow as she read the heartbreaking notes of a life cut short by neglect and illness. Determined to find out more, she continued sifting through the files. Each one told a similar story. Patients abandoned to die in the hidden ward, their suffering hidden away from the rest of the hospital. The final file she opened belonged to a boy named Tommy, who had drawn a crude map on the back of one of his medical charts. The map seemed to indicate another room in the ward, one she hadn't discovered yet. Layla folded the map and slipped it into her pocket. As she did, the office door slammed shut behind her, and the temperature in the room plummeted. Her breath came out in visible puffs, and she could feel the presence of something or someone watching her. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice echoing in the small space. There was no response, only the growing sense of dread that wrapped around her like a shroud. She tried the door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as she pounded on the wood, the sound echoing in the otherwise silent ward. The shadows in the room seemed to move, closing in on her. Desperate, she turned back to the filing cabinet, hoping for some clue that might help her escape. As she rifled through the drawers, she found a small leather-bound journal wedged at the back. She pulled it out and opened it, her eyes scanning the neat, precise handwriting. It belonged to the head nurse. Her name, Nurse Matilda Blackwell, was scrawled on the first page. Layla read through the journal, her horror growing with each entry. Nurse Blackwell had documented the slow, agonizing deaths of her patients with a detached, almost clinical precision. But as the entries progressed, they took on a more sinister tone, detailing her efforts to cleanse the hospital of the unworthy patients. A sudden noise behind her made Layla whirl around, her flashlight beam catching the spectral form of Nurse Blackwell standing in the doorway. The ghost's eyes were cold and unforgiving, and her mouth twisted into a cruel smile. "You shouldn't be here," the ghostly nurse whispered, her voice echoing in Layla's mind. "This is my ward, and you are trespassing." Layla backed away, clutching the journal to her chest. The room seemed to close in around her, the walls pressing closer. The air was thick with malice, and she could feel the spirits of the forgotten patients watching her, their sorrow mingling with her own fear. "I need to help them," Layla said, her voice shaking. "I need to set them free." Nurse Blackwell's form flickered, and her expression hardened. "They are mine," she hissed, "and you will join them." With a surge of adrenaline, Layla lunged for the door, her hand finding the latch. To her surprise, it gave way, and she stumbled into the hallway, the cold air of the ward wrapping around her like a suffocating blanket. She ran, the ghostly whispers and Nurse Blackwell's laughter echoing in her ears. She didn't stop until she burst through the makeshift entrance and back into the basement, gasping for breath. The sunlight filtering through the basement windows was a welcome sight, dispelling the darkness that clung to her. As she leaned against the wall, catching her breath, Layla knew that the spirits of Wardsey were trapped, their suffering kept alive by the malevolent Nurse Blackwell. She had to find a way to help them, to uncover the truth and break the curse that bound them to the hospital. But first, she needed to find the room marked on Tommy's map. The answers were there, and so was the key to freeing the tormented souls of the Phantom Hospital ward. The day had been long, and night had fallen by the time Layla could return to the hidden ward. She equipped herself with more supplies, a backpack containing extra flashlights, a portable lantern, a digital recorder, and a first aid kit. She knew she would need all the help she could get to face the haunted halls and uncover the secrets buried within. The hospital was quieter now, the bustle of the day replaced by a serene silence. Layla made her way back to the basement, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. As she approached the concealed entrance, a sense of dread washed over her, but she pushed it aside. She had a mission, and she couldn't turn back now. She slipped through the opening, the cold air of the ward wrapping around her like a shroud. The hallway stretched out before her, even more foreboding than she remembered. The shadows seemed to move and breathe, and the faint whispers began almost immediately. With Tommy's map clutched in her hand, Layla moved cautiously through the corridor, her lantern casting a dim glow that barely penetrated the darkness. The ghostly figures she had seen before were more active now, their forms flitting in and out of sight, their eyes filled with unspoken sorrow. "Stay focused," she told herself, her voice a comforting whisper in the oppressive silence. She followed the map, turning down a side hallway that led deeper into the ward. The walls here were lined with old photographs and medical charts, their edges yellowed with age. As she passed, she could feel the eyes in the photographs following her, their gazes heavy with accusation. The whispers grew louder, more distinct. Layla could make out fragments of conversations, cries for help, and the faint sound of children's laughter, distorted and eerie in the empty ward. Her heart pounded as she reached the end of the hallway, where a heavy metal door loomed before her. This was the room marked on Tommy's map. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest. The room beyond was a stark contrast to the rest of the ward, well preserved and eerily untouched by time. It was a small classroom, filled with tiny desks and chairs, and the walls were covered in colorful drawings. Layla stepped inside, her lantern illuminating the room. At the front, a chalkboard still bore the faded remnants of a lesson, and a large, old-fashioned clock ticked softly on the wall. She moved slowly, her eyes scanning the room for any clues that might help her understand the horrors that had taken place here. As she approached the teacher's desk, she noticed a stack of papers neatly arranged on top. She picked them up, her eyes widening as she read the first page. It was a list of names, children who had been patients in the ward, along with their conditions and dates of death. Her heart sank as she recognized many of the names from the files she had found in Nurse Blackwell's office. A soft giggle echoed through the room, and Layla spun around, her lantern beam catching the figure of a little girl standing by the door. The girl's translucent form shimmered in the dim light, her eyes wide and curious. "Are you here to help us?" the girl asked, her voice a faint whisper. Layla nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "Yes, I am. My name is Layla. What's your name?" "Lucy," the girl replied, her form flickering slightly. "We've been waiting for someone to find us. We've been waiting for so long." Layla's heart ached for the girl and the others trapped in the ward. "I'm going to do everything I can to help you, Lucy, but I need to know more about what happened here." Lucy's expression grew sad, and she pointed to a cupboard at the back of the room. "The answers are in there, but you have to be careful. She doesn't want you to find them." "She?" Layla asked, though she already knew the answer. "Nurse Blackwell," Lucy whispered, her voice trembling. "She's very angry. She doesn't want us to leave." Layla nodded, steeling herself for what she might find. She crossed the room to the cupboard and opened it, revealing a small hidden compartment at the back. Inside, she found a bundle of letters and a worn, leather-bound diary. The letters were from desperate parents pleading for their children's release, their words filled with anguish and fear. The diary belonged to Nurse Blackwell, and as Layla read the entries, her horror grew. Nurse Blackwell had believed she was doing God's work, cleansing the hospital of the weak and sickly children who, in her twisted mind, would only suffer in the outside world. She had orchestrated their deaths, ensuring they remained hidden from the hospital staff and the world beyond. Her final entries were filled with paranoia and madness, detailing how she had sealed the ward and trapped the children's spirits, believing it was her divine duty to keep them there forever. A sudden chill filled the room, and Layla looked up to see Nurse Blackwell's ghostly form standing by the door. Her eyes were filled with rage, and her presence seemed to suck the warmth from the air. "You have no right to be here," Nurse Blackwell hissed, her voice echoing with malice. "These children are mine. You cannot take them from me." Layla stood her ground, clutching the diary tightly. "You were wrong, Nurse Blackwell. These children deserve peace. I'm going to free them, and there's nothing you can do to stop me." The nurse's form flickered, her rage intensifying. "You will fail, just like all the others." As the ghostly figure advanced, Layla felt a surge of determination. She had uncovered the truth, and now she had to find a way to break the curse that bound the spirits to the ward. With Lucy's help and the evidence she had gathered, she knew there was hope. But the real battle had only just begun, and Layla steeled herself for the challenges ahead, knowing she couldn't rest until the spirits of the haunted halls were finally free. Layla emerged from the hidden classroom, her resolve strengthening despite the palpable fear that lingered in the air. The diary and letters she had found weighed heavily in her backpack, each word a testament to the suffering Nurse Blackwell had inflicted. She had to uncover more about the spirits trapped in the ward, starting with Lucy. "Lucy," Layla called softly, her voice echoing through the corridor. The faint light from her lantern cast eerie shadows on the walls, but there was no sign of the little girl. Suddenly, a giggle echoed behind her. Layla spun around, her heart racing. Standing at the end of the hallway was Lucy, her ghostly form shimmering in the dim light. "Lucy, I need your help," Layla said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need to know more about what happened here." Lucy floated closer, her expression a mix of curiosity and sadness. "We were all brought here because we were sick, but Nurse Blackwell didn't help us. She made us worse." Layla nodded, her heart aching for the child. "I read some of the letters and the diary. She believed she was doing the right thing, but she was wrong. We need to find a way to free you and the others." Lucy's eyes widened with hope. "Can you really help us?" "I'm going to try my best," Layla assured her. "But I need to know more about you and the others. Can you tell me about the day you arrived here?" Lucy hesitated, her form flickering as if the memory pained her. "It was a long time ago. I was very sick, and my parents couldn't afford to take care of me. They brought me here, hoping I would get better. But Nurse Blackwell, she wasn't kind. She kept us locked away, and we never saw our families again." Layla felt a surge of anger towards the malevolent nurse. "I'm so sorry, Lucy. You didn't deserve that." A sudden crash from down the hallway made Layla jump. The temperature dropped, and the whispers grew louder, more urgent. Layla turned, her lantern revealing the spectral figure of a young boy, his face twisted in anguish. "Help us," the boy whispered, his voice a mournful wail. "We can't leave. She won't let us." Layla's heart ached for the boy. "What's your name?" "Tommy," he replied, his form flickering. "I drew a map to help us escape, but she found it. She punished me." Layla reached out, her hand passing through his ethereal form. "I'm sorry, Tommy. I found your map. I'm going to find a way to free you." As she spoke, the whispers intensified, and more ghostly figures emerged from the shadows. Layla was surrounded by the spirits of children, each one bearing the marks of their suffering. Their eyes were hollow, filled with an unending sorrow that tugged at her heart. A chilling laugh echoed through the hallway, and Layla felt the air grow colder. Nurse Blackwell's spectral form materialized before her, her eyes blazing with fury. "You will not take them from me," Nurse Blackwell hissed, her voice dripping with malice. "They belong to me, forever." Layla stood her ground, her resolve unwavering. "You can't keep them here. They deserve peace, and I'm going to make sure they get it." Nurse Blackwell's form flickered, her rage palpable. "You think you can defeat me? You are nothing but a foolish girl." With a surge of courage, Layla held up the diary. "This is your confession, Nurse Blackwell. You can't hide the truth anymore. The world will know what you did." The nurse's eyes widened with horror, her form beginning to waver. The children's spirits surged forward, their whispers growing louder, filled with hope and defiance. "You can't hold us here forever," Lucy said, her voice strong. "We want to be free." As the spectral children surrounded Nurse Blackwell, Layla felt a shift in the air. The nurse's form began to disintegrate, her screams of rage and fear echoing through the ward. The children reached out, their hands touching the malevolent spirit, and with a final, anguished wail, Nurse Blackwell vanished, her presence dissipating into the ether. The oppressive cold lifted, and the whispers faded into a peaceful silence. The children's forms began to glow, their faces no longer twisted in sorrow, but filled with a serene happiness. "Thank you," Lucy whispered, her form shimmering with light. "You've set us free." Layla watched, tears in her eyes, as the spirits began to fade, their suffering finally coming to an end. "You're welcome, Lucy. Be at peace." As the last of the spirits vanished, Layla stood alone in the hallway, the weight of the diary still heavy in her hand. She knew her journey wasn't over. There were still questions to be answered and a story to be told. But for now, she had given the children of Ward C the peace they had been denied for so long. With a deep breath, Layla turned and made her way back to the entrance, her heart lighter and her resolve stronger. The haunted halls of the forgotten ward were now silent, the echoes of abandonment finally laid to rest. Layla spent the next few days poring over the old patient records and Nurse Blackwell's diary, determined to piece together the full extent of the ward's tragic history. Each file she read was a testament to the suffering and neglect that had taken place within those haunted halls. Her heart ached with every page turned, but she knew she needed to understand the past if she was to truly help the spirits find peace. One evening, Layla sat in the hospital's small library, surrounded by stacks of old documents. The dim light of her desk lamp cast a warm glow over the pages, contrasting sharply with the cold, clinical setting of the rest of the hospital. She had gathered as many records as she could find, determined to uncover the full story. She started with the earliest files, dating back to the ward's opening in the late 1920s. The initial records were unremarkable, documenting routine treatments and patient care. However, as she delved deeper into the files, a pattern of neglect and mistreatment began to emerge. Patients were often admitted with minor illnesses, but quickly deteriorated due to the appalling conditions in the ward. Many of the children were malnourished and left without proper medical attention. Layla's stomach churned as she read about the unsanitary conditions and the lack of basic necessities like clean water and fresh air. The more recent files were even more harrowing. Entries in Nurse Blackwell's diary revealed her increasing paranoia and cruelty. She had become convinced that the children were tainted and believed it was her duty to cleanse them. The diary entries were chilling, filled with descriptions of her twisted treatments and the punishments she inflicted on those who disobeyed. One entry, dated just a few weeks before the ward was sealed off, stood out to Layla. March 5th, 1931. The children are becoming restless. They speak of seeing their parents in their dreams, begging to be released. I cannot allow them to leave. They must be purified, cleansed of their afflictions. Today, I had to punish Tommy again. He tried to escape, to find help. I cannot let them go. They are mine to save, mine to protect from the outside world. Layla's hands trembled as she read the entry, the horror of Nurse Blackwell's actions becoming all too real. The thought of those children, trapped and suffering under her care, filled her with a deep sense of sorrow and anger. Determined to find any remaining clues, Layla decided to revisit the ward. She needed to see if there were any additional records or hidden compartments that might shed more light on the tragic events. Armed with her flashlight, camera, and notebook, she made her way back to the concealed entrance. The ward was eerily silent as she stepped inside, the oppressive atmosphere pressing down on her. She moved quickly through the corridor, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. She retraced her steps to the room with the filing cabinet, hoping she had missed something in her previous search. As she rifled through the drawers, she discovered a hidden compartment at the bottom. Inside was a bundle of letters, all addressed to the hospital administration. Layla's heart raced as she carefully opened each one, her eyes scanning the desperate pleas from parents and relatives begging for information about their children. The letters painted a heartbreaking picture of families torn apart, their loved ones taken to the ward and never heard from again. One letter in particular caught her attention. April 10th, 1931. To whom it may concern, I am writing to inquire about my daughter, Lucy. She was admitted to Ward C several months ago, and I have not received any updates on her condition. Please, I beg of you, let me know if she is well. I am desperate for news of my little girl. Sincerely, Margaret Thompson. Layla felt tears welling up as she read the letter. Lucy's story was just one of many, and the pain and desperation of the parents were palpable in their words. She carefully collected the letters, knowing they were crucial evidence of the ward's dark history. As she turned to leave, a cold draft swept through the room, extinguishing her flashlight. The darkness enveloped her, and the whispers began again, more urgent and desperate than before. Layla felt a presence behind her and turned to see the faint outline of a young boy, his eyes filled with sorrow. "Help us," Tommy's voice echoed softly. "We need to be remembered." Layla nodded, her voice trembling. "I promise, Tommy. I will make sure your stories are told." With renewed determination, she made her way back to the hospital library. She spent hours organizing the files, letters, and diary entries, compiling a comprehensive record of the ward's history. Her goal was clear: to bring the truth to light and ensure that the spirits of Ward C were never forgotten. As she worked late into the night, Layla felt a sense of purpose guiding her. The horrors of the past had to be acknowledged, and the voices of the abandoned children needed to be heard. With every document she organized, she was one step closer to honoring their memory and finding a way to finally set them free. Days turned into weeks as Layla tirelessly worked to compile her findings into a comprehensive report. The stories of the children, Nurse Blackwell's descent into madness, and the heartbreaking letters from desperate parents consumed her thoughts. She spent long hours in the hospital library, her only company the ghosts of the past she was trying to understand. One night, as she was transcribing notes from Nurse Blackwell's diary, she felt a sudden chill in the air. The temperature in the room plummeted, and a sense of unease settled over her. Layla glanced around, her eyes scanning the dimly lit library, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Shaking off the feeling, she returned to her work. But as she continued to write, the sense of being watched grew stronger. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and she could almost feel a cold breath against her skin. She looked up again, her heart pounding, and this time she saw it. A shadowy figure standing in the corner of the room, its form flickering in and out of view. Layla's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the figure. It was a woman, her eyes glowing with an eerie light. The figure's presence exuded malice and anger, and Layla knew instantly who it was. "Nurse Blackwell," she whispered, her voice trembling. The ghostly figure stepped forward, her movements slow and deliberate. "You should have left well enough alone," Nurse Blackwell hissed, her voice echoing with a supernatural resonance. "This is my domain, and you have no place here." Layla stood her ground, clutching her pen tightly. "These children deserve peace. I won't stop until I've freed them from your grasp." Nurse Blackwell's form flickered, her expression twisting into one of rage. "They are mine. You cannot take them from me." Suddenly, the room seemed to darken, the shadows closing in around Layla. She felt an oppressive weight pressing down on her, making it difficult to breathe. The ghostly figure advanced, her eyes burning with fury. Layla scrambled to her feet, knocking over her chair in the process. "Stay away from me," she shouted, backing towards the door. But the nurse's spirit was relentless, her form growing more solid with each step. Just as Layla reached the door, she felt a cold hand grip her shoulder. She cried out, the icy touch sending a shock through her body. Nurse Blackwell's face was inches from hers now, her eyes filled with a terrifying intensity. "You cannot save them," the ghost whispered. "They will be trapped here forever, just as I intended." Layla's fear was palpable, but she refused to back down. With a surge of adrenaline, she yanked herself free from the ghost's grip and bolted from the room. The cold air seemed to follow her, the whispers of the tormented children echoing in her ears. She raced down the empty corridors of the hospital, her footsteps pounding against the floor. She didn't stop until she reached the safety of her office, slamming the door shut behind her. Her heart was racing, and she could still feel the chill of the ghost's touch on her skin. Sitting at her desk, she took several deep breaths to calm herself. She knew she couldn't let Nurse Blackwell intimidate her. The spirits of the children were counting on her, and she was determined to see this through to the end. Determined to confront the malevolent spirit and end her reign of terror, Layla decided to return to the hidden ward once more. She needed to find the room where Nurse Blackwell had died, hoping it might hold the key to breaking the curse. With renewed resolve, Layla gathered her supplies and made her way back to the basement. The hospital was eerily quiet at night, the only sounds the distant hum of machinery and the soft rustle of her footsteps. She reached the concealed entrance and slipped through, the cold air of the ward wrapping around her like a shroud. The ward was even darker than before, the shadows seeming to pulse with a life of their own. Layla moved cautiously through the hallway, her flashlight beam barely penetrating the oppressive darkness. She followed Tommy's map, her steps taking her deeper into the heart of the ward. Finally, she reached a heavy metal door, its surface covered in rust and grime. This was the place where Nurse Blackwell had met her end. Layla pushed the door open, the hinges creaking in protest. The room beyond was a small office, similar to the one she had discovered earlier. But this room had a sinister air, the walls lined with shelves filled with old medical equipment and bottles of dark, unknown liquids. In the center of the room stood a large wooden desk, its surface covered in dust and cobwebs. Layla approached the desk, her flashlight revealing a set of old keys and a leather-bound journal similar to the one she had found earlier. She picked up the journal, flipping through the pages. This one contained detailed notes about Nurse Blackwell's final days, her descent into madness clearly documented. June 15th, 1931. They are all against me. The hospital staff, the patients, even the children. They don't understand the work I am doing here. They call me mad, but I know the truth. I am saving these children, purifying them. They will thank me one day, but I feel them watching me, the spirits of the ones I couldn't save. They whisper in the dark, accusing me, blaming me. I will not let them take me. I will remain strong. I must. Layla felt a chill run down her spine as she read the entry. Nurse Blackwell had been tormented by the very spirits she had imprisoned, her mind unraveling under the weight of her own guilt and madness. As Layla placed the journal back on the desk, she noticed a small hidden compartment underneath. She pried it open, revealing a bundle of letters and a locket. The letters were more of Nurse Blackwell's correspondence, detailing her twisted plans and justifications. The locket, however, contained a small photograph of a young girl, Nurse Blackwell's daughter. Layla realized that the nurse's actions had been driven by a twisted sense of love and duty, her desire to protect her daughter's memory warping into a horrific obsession with purity and control. She knew that to break the curse, she would need to confront Nurse Blackwell with the truth and help her find peace. With the locket and letters in hand, Layla steeled herself for the final confrontation. She left the office and made her way back to the main ward, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The spirits of the children watched her from the shadows, their eyes filled with hope and fear. In the center of the ward, Nurse Blackwell's ghost awaited, her form more solid and menacing than ever. Her eyes blazed with fury as Layla approached, the air growing colder with each step. "You cannot defeat me," Nurse Blackwell snarled. "They are mine, and you will never take them." Layla held up the locket, the small photograph gleaming in the dim light. "This is your daughter, isn't it? You did all of this because you couldn't save her." The ghost's eyes widened, her fury giving way to confusion and sorrow. My daughter," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I only wanted to protect her memory." Layla stepped closer, her voice gentle but firm. "You can't keep these children here. They deserve peace, just like your daughter. It's time to let them go." Nurse Blackwell's form wavered, her eyes filling with tears. I was wrong. I see that now." As the ghost's resolve weakened, the spirits of the children surrounded her, their forms glowing with the soft, comforting light. Lucy stepped forward, her hand outstretched. "It's time to rest, Nurse Blackwell," Lucy said softly. "We forgive you." With a final anguished cry, Nurse Blackwell's spirit dissolved, her form fading into the light. The oppressive cold lifted, replaced by a warmth that filled the ward. The children's spirits began to ascend, their faces filled with peace and gratitude. "Thank you, Layla," Lucy whispered as her form faded. "We are free." Layla watched, tears streaming down her face, as the last of the spirits disappeared. The ward, once filled with sorrow and pain, was now a place of peace and tranquility. As she made her way back to the hospital, Layla felt a sense of accomplishment and closure. She had uncovered the truth freed the trapped spirits, and brought peace to the haunted halls of the Phantom Hospital ward. The hospital's administration had always dismissed the rumors about Ward C, considering them mere ghost stories meant to spook new staff. However, Layla's meticulous documentation, complete with the journal, letters, and photographs, was irrefutable. With a deep breath, she approached Dr. Phillips, the hospital director, to present her findings. Dr. Phillips was a stern man, known for his skepticism. He raised an eyebrow as Layla entered his office, her arms laden with files and documents. "Dr. Carter, what is this about?" he asked, his tone a mixture of curiosity and impatience. Layla placed the files on his desk, spreading out the evidence. "It's about Ward C, the forgotten patients, the neglect, the cover-up, everything. I found undeniable proof of what happened there." Dr. Phillips sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Ward C was closed decades ago. What could you possibly have found?" Layla handed him Nurse Blackwell's diary. "Read this. It's the diary of Nurse Blackwell, who ran the ward. It documents the neglect, the suffering of the children, and her eventual descent into madness." Dr. Phillips reluctantly took the diary, flipping through the pages. As he read, his expression shifted from skepticism to shock. "This is horrifying," he muttered, his face growing pale. "I had no idea." Layla nodded. "There's more. Letters from parents begging for news about their children, patient records showing how they were neglected and abandoned. This ward was a place of horror, and the spirits of those children have been trapped there ever since." Dr. Phillips looked up, his eyes filled with regret. "We need to bring this to light. The hospital must acknowledge what happened and make amends." They spent the next few days preparing a formal report, complete with Layla's findings and recommendations for a memorial to honor the forgotten patients. The hospital board was convened, and Layla presented her evidence to a room filled with somber faces. As she spoke, recounting the tragic stories of Lucy, Tommy, and the other children, the weight of the past seemed to settle over everyone. The board members were moved by the undeniable proof of the ward's dark history, and they unanimously agreed that the truth needed to be acknowledged. A week later, a press conference was held to announce the findings. The media swarmed the hospital, eager to learn about the revelations from Ward C. Layla stood at the podium, her heart pounding as she prepared to share the story that had consumed her life for the past months. "Today, we acknowledge a dark chapter in our hospital's history," she began, her voice steady. "Ward C was a place of suffering and neglect. The children admitted they were abandoned, mistreated, and ultimately forgotten. But we will forget no longer. We are here to honor their memory and ensure that such a tragedy never happens again." She went on to detail the evidence she had found, holding up Nurse Blackwell's diary and reading excerpts from the heartbreaking letters. The room was silent, the weight of the past hanging heavy in the air. After the press conference, the hospital announced plans to convert the old ward into a memorial. A plaque would be installed, bearing the names of the children who had died there, along with the promise that their suffering would never be forgotten. The story of Ward C spread quickly, and the public response was overwhelming. People from all over sent messages of support and condolences, and donations poured in to fund the memorial. One afternoon, as construction on the memorial began, Layla returned to the ward one last time. The oppressive cold and ghostly whispers were gone, replaced by a peaceful silence. She stood in the room where she had first encountered Lucy, her heart filled with a sense of closure. "You did it," a soft voice said behind her. Layla turned to see the faint, shimmering form of Lucy, her face radiant with gratitude. "Thank you, Layla. We can finally rest." Tears filled Layla's eyes as she smiled. "You're welcome, Lucy. Be at peace." With a final glowing smile, Lucy's spirit faded, leaving Layla alone in the quiet, empty ward. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her journey lift from her shoulders. As she left the ward for the last time, she knew that she had fulfilled her promise. The spirits of Ward C were finally free, and their story would be remembered forever. Layla walked away with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to continue her work as a healer and an advocate for those who couldn't speak for themselves. With the truth about Ward C revealed and the hospital committed to honoring the memory of the children, Layla felt a sense of closure. However, the horrors she had uncovered continued to haunt her, invading her dreams and disrupting her thoughts. The spirits of the forgotten children were at peace, but Nurse Blackwell's presence lingered in Layla's mind, a constant reminder of the malevolent force she had confronted. Layla's sleep was plagued by nightmares. She would find herself back in the dark, decaying corridors of Ward C, the ghostly whispers growing louder and more insistent. In her dreams, Nurse Blackwell would appear, her eyes burning with fury, her voice echoing with accusations. "You think you can forget me? You think you can escape what you saw?" the ghost would hiss, her face twisted in rage. Layla would wake in a cold sweat, her heart pounding, the echoes of Nurse Blackwell's voice lingering in her ears. She struggled to focus during her waking hours, her work suffering as she grappled with the lingering effects of her ordeal. Her colleagues noticed the change in her demeanor, their concerned looks a constant reminder that she was not the same person she had been before she discovered the hidden ward. One evening, after another restless night, Layla decided to seek help. She reached out to Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a renowned psychologist specializing in trauma. Dr. Mitchell agreed to see her immediately, understanding the urgency in Layla's voice. As Layla sat in Dr. Mitchell's office, she felt a sense of relief. Finally, she would be able to talk about her experiences with someone who could help her make sense of them. "Layla, I've read your report about Ward C," Dr. Mitchell began, her tone gentle but firm. "What you went through was incredibly traumatic. It's no wonder you're struggling." Layla nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her coffee cup. "I can't stop thinking about it. The children, Nurse Blackwell, she haunts my dreams. I feel like I'm losing my mind." Dr. Mitchell leaned forward, her eyes filled with empathy. "You're not losing your mind. You're experiencing post-traumatic stress. Your mind is trying to process the horror you uncovered, and it's manifesting in these nightmares and intrusive thoughts." Layla took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "What can I do? How can I move past this?" Dr. Mitchell smiled reassuringly. "We'll work through it together. Therapy, relaxation techniques, and possibly medication can all help. But the first step is understanding that it's okay to feel this way. You face something truly horrific, and it's natural to be affected by it." Layla felt a glimmer of hope. "Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. I just want to feel like myself again." Over the next few weeks, Layla began attending regular therapy sessions with Dr. Mitchell. They delved into her experiences in Ward C, exploring her feelings of guilt, fear, and helplessness. Dr. Mitchell taught her techniques to manage her anxiety and cope with the intrusive thoughts that plagued her. Despite the progress she made in therapy, the nightmares persisted. Each night, Layla found herself back in the ward, the cold air and ghostly whispers as vivid as ever. Nurse Blackwell's spirit continued to torment her, a malevolent presence that refused to let go. One night, after an especially harrowing nightmare, Layla decided she needed to confront the ghost once more. She realized that while the children had found peace, Nurse Blackwell's spirit remained trapped, her guilt and madness binding her to the ward. Layla returned to the hospital, her determination stronger than her fear. She made her way to the basement, the familiar sense of dread settling over her as she approached the concealed entrance. She stepped through, the cold air of the ward wrapping around her like a shroud. The ward was silent, the oppressive atmosphere heavy with the presence of the unseen. Layla walked down the corridor, her footsteps echoing in the darkness. She reached the room where Nurse Blackwell had died, the metal door standing as a grim sentinel to the horrors within. Layla pushed the door open, the creaking hinges sounding like a lament. The room was exactly as she remembered it, the shelves lined with old medical equipment and the desk covered in dust. She stepped inside, her flashlight casting long shadows on the walls. "Nurse Blackwell," Layla called out, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "I know you're here. We need to talk." The air grew colder, and the ghostly form of Nurse Blackwell materialized before her, her eyes burning with the same fury and madness as before. "You dare return here? After everything you've done?" Layla took a deep breath, meeting the ghost's gaze. "I know you suffered, just like the children, but tormenting me won't bring them back. It's time for you to find peace too." Nurse Blackwell's form flickered, her expression shifting from rage to confusion. "Peace? How can I find peace after everything I've done?" "You can start by forgiving yourself," Layla said gently. "You were trying to save those children, even if your methods were wrong. Acknowledge your mistakes and let go of the guilt that's binding you here." The ghost's eyes filled with tears, her form growing more translucent. I never meant to hurt them. I thought I was helping." Layla nodded, her heart aching for the tortured spirit. "It's not too late to make amends. Let go of the past and find the peace you deserve." With a final anguished sob, Nurse Blackwell's form began to dissolve, the oppressive cold lifting as her spirit finally found release. Layla watched, tears streaming down her face, as the ghost faded into the ether, leaving the room bathed in a peaceful, golden light. As she stood in the now quiet room, Layla felt a profound sense of relief. The nightmare was finally over. Nurse Blackwell and the children were at peace, and Layla knew that she could begin to heal. She left the ward for the last time, the weight of the past lifting from her shoulders. She had faced her fears, confronted the darkness, and emerged stronger for it. With a renewed sense of purpose, Layla was ready to move forward, knowing that she had honored the memory of the forgotten children and brought peace to the haunted halls of the Phantom Hospital ward. Though Layla had confronted and helped Nurse Blackwell find peace, the toll of her experiences in Ward C lingered. She had set the spirits free, but the haunted memories remained vivid. Determined to ensure the hospital acknowledged its past and prevented future horrors, Layla continued her work, knowing the final piece of the puzzle lay in sharing the full truth with the world. The hospital administration had been cooperative so far, but Layla knew that public accountability was crucial. She organized a community meeting, inviting former patients, their families, hospital staff, and local media to attend. The event would be held in the newly constructed memorial within the now renovated Ward C, transformed from a place of torment into a serene space of remembrance and healing. As the day of the meeting approached, Layla prepared meticulously, gathering her evidence and rehearsing her speech. She knew that her words could finally bring closure to the families and ensure the hospital's commitment to transparency and ethical care. However, the weight of the past and the spirits she had encountered still pressed on her, a constant reminder of the stakes. On the morning of the meeting, Layla stood before the memorial plaque, inscribed with the names of the children who had suffered in Ward C. She felt a deep sense of responsibility, knowing she was their voice. As people began to fill the room, the atmosphere was somber but hopeful. The faces of those who had lost loved ones mingled with curious onlookers and supportive colleagues. Dr. Phillips approached her, his expression grave but encouraging. "You're doing something important today, Layla. We're all behind you." Layla nodded, her resolve firm. "Thank you, Doctor." "Phillips, it's time to tell the world." As the meeting began, Layla took the podium, the weight of the past heavy on her shoulders, but her determination unwavering. She began with the history of Ward C, detailing its origins and the initial purpose that had been so tragically twisted. She presented the evidence she had found, the diary, the letters, the patient records, each piece a testament to the suffering and neglect. The room was silent, the audience captivated by the harrowing story. Layla's voice wavered slightly as she recounted her own experiences, the ghostly encounters that had driven her to uncover the truth. She spoke of Lucy, Tommy, and the other children, their spirits finally at peace thanks to her efforts. She described Nurse Blackwell's torment, her misguided attempts at salvation, and the eventual release of her spirit. When she finished, the room erupted in applause, a cathartic release of emotion. Families wept openly, grateful for the closure they had sought for so long. The media captured every moment, ensuring the story of Ward C would reach a wider audience. After the meeting, many attendees approached Layla, expressing their gratitude and sharing their own stories. Among them was an elderly woman who introduced herself as Margaret Thompson, Lucy's mother. "Thank you," Margaret said, her eyes brimming with tears. "I never knew what happened to my little girl. Knowing she's at peace means everything to me." Layla embraced her, tears in her own eyes. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Your daughter's spirit was incredibly strong. She helped me find the truth." As the crowd dispersed, Dr. Phillips joined Layla, his expression thoughtful. "You've done more than uncover the past, Layla. You've given these families closure and our hospital a chance to make things right." Layla nodded, feeling a sense of accomplishment. "We need to ensure something like this never happens again. Ethical training, regular audits, and a commitment to transparency are just the beginning." Dr. Phillips agreed. "We'll implement these changes immediately. Ward C will serve as a reminder of the past and a symbol of our commitment to the future." That evening, as Layla walked through the now peaceful halls of Ward C, she felt a sense of calm she hadn't known in months. The air was no longer oppressive, the whispers replaced by a serene silence. She paused before the memorial plaque, running her fingers over the names etched in stone. "You're free now," she whispered, a soft smile playing on her lips. "Rest in peace." As she turned to leave, She felt a gentle, comforting presence beside her, a final, silent thank you from the spirits she had helped. Layla walked away from Ward C with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to continue her work as a healer and an advocate, knowing she had made a difference. The haunted halls were haunted no more, transformed into a place of remembrance and hope, thanks to the courage and determination of one woman who refused to let the past be forgotten.